Because he was so beautiful, these drunk and intoxicated men would pick him up, thinking he was a woman. When they get to the hotel room, William would give the men a condition that they should go straight to the point and enter him from behind. He would not allow them touch him or do any form of foreplay with him. William at 8 was unlike any other boy in his neighborhood. He had a beautiful face that seemed almost sculpted, a face that turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that set him apart. It was his love for makeup. Often, he would sneak into his mother's room, experimenting with her lipstick and brushes, his little hands deftly applying red lipstick with a precision that would surprise even a professional. Makeup was his solace, his escape from a world that demanded he be something he wasn't. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, were far too busy to notice the emotional needs of their only child. Mr. Johnson was a stern disciplinarian who believed that academic excellence was the only path to success. He had been raised in a harsh environment himself, disciplined mercilessly by his own father, which he believed had molded him into the successful engineer he was today. To him, William was destined for the same path, and he only paid attention to his academic performance, determined that his son would surpass all his peers. The burden of his father's expectations weighed heavily on William. Every day he was reminded that he had to outperform his classmates, who his father deemed his enemies. As a young child, William received massive beatings from his father, who would bruise his face and body if he dared to fail his assignments or exams. The constant pressure and beatings turned the school into a battlefield, where William fought not just to succeed, but to survive. In a world where failure meant pain, William turned to the one thing that brought him comfort: makeup. Since his early years, whenever his father's beatings left scars in his face and body, William would rush to his mother's makeup kit, using foundation to cover the bruises, applying blush to give his cheeks some color, and topping it all off with his favorite red lipstick. He loved the way it made him feel beautiful, powerful, in control of something, at least for a while. His mother, who had caught him with makeup once or twice, paid little attention. She was too busy with the multimillionaire business her husband had set up for her, a business she felt indebted to him for. She never challenged Mr. Johnson, never intervened, and simply hoped that William would outgrow what she saw as a childish phase. One day, as Mrs. Johnson chatted with her friend in the living room, William passed by, his face carefully painted with the bright red lipstick he loved. Her friend was shocked. "Can't you see your son?" she asked. "Why is he wearing makeup?" Mrs. Johnson brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just a child's thing. He'll outgrow it. But you should stop it before it becomes something else," her friend warned. Mrs. Johnson sighed. "I have no real say when it comes to William. I was just a poor girl who married into the Johnsons' wealthy family. I don't want anything that will turn my husband's anger towards me. Who am I to interfere?" "He'll be fine," she assured, trying to change the topic to business. And so, William continued to live his life in a quiet corner of his own. His father, Mr. Johnson, cared only for his son's grades, and William worked tirelessly to meet his father's standards, even though the fear of failure loomed large. The boy was not pampered despite the family's wealth. He did chores, ran errands, and always tried to do more to gain some semblance of approval. The only place he found refuge was in his makeup, which his father knew nothing about. But William was being watched. Mr. Mark, a man who lived down the street, had been observing William for a while. Mesmerized by his beautiful face, he would watch from his window as William walked by on his daily errands, biding his time. One weekend, while William's parents were home, Mr. Johnson sent him on another errand. Along the road, William lost the money he had been given. Panic set in, and he began to cry. Mr. Mark, who had been watching, saw his chance. He called William over, offered him a glass of milk to calm him down. Milk he had secretly drugged. Mr. Mark asked William why he was crying, and William narrated it all to Mr. Mark. How he was so scared to return back home because of how mercilessly his father would handle him for losing his money. Mr. Mark quickly comforted William, promising to give him back the money he lost, but on one condition. As the drug began to work on William, weakening his muscles, Mr. Mark's countenance changed, revealing his true intent. He took advantage of William, bending him over and doing the unthinkable. What happened that day was too horrible for an 8-year-old to comprehend. When he was done, he handed William the money as he had promised, telling him not to tell anyone of their little secret. William returned home, sobbing in the dark, unable to speak to his parents, who were not his friends, but distant figures who imposed their rules and expectations. He cried himself to sleep, and that marked the first abuse William had experienced in the course of his little life. The trauma of what happened that day compounded the pain already festering in his young heart. With no one to turn to, no one who would understand or even care, William's behavior grew erratic. At school, he became aggressive, lashing out at classmates, seeing in them the enemies his father had told him about. One day, in a fit of rage, he broke another student's head during a fight. He was expelled, labeled as a problem child. When the school reported the incident to his father, Mr. Johnson was furious. He scolded William harshly, vowing to teach him discipline the hard way. He decided to send William to his strict aunt in the village, a woman known for her rigid ways. William was to stay there until he was fixed, not allowed back until he had been disciplined properly. His aunt was cruel, and her daughters were no different. They mocked William, made him do all the farm work, and sadly, they often forgot to leave food for William before he returned from the work each day. They called this discipline. One day as William was returning home, 3 male touts, smoking and loitering around an uncompleted building, called him over. "Why is your face looking like a woman's own?" they taunted. What happened next was another unspeakable violation. They told William not to scream or make any noise, else they would kill him in that uncompleted building, and no one would know. It turned out these men were gay, and so they decided to abuse William all over again. While they took turns, one watched outside to make sure no one was coming. When they were done, they gave him some money afterward, as if that would make up for what they had done. Tears streamed down William's cheeks as he used the money to buy food, eating slowly, painfully, realizing it was the first time in years he had eaten so well. The pain and suffering became too much for William. One day, he took the money he had saved from the touts and fled the village, hoping to return home and end his suffering. But when he arrived, his father was furious to see him back. "You're not supposed to be here," Mr. Johnson shouted. 2 years, no less. So he told his son to return back to the village and not show his face in the house until he completed his time in the village with his aunt. His mother, helpless, watched in silent agony, knowing she could do nothing to interfere. Her fear of her husband's wrath kept her silent. But the next day, William pretended to be leaving back for the village, but instead he ran away, this time with nowhere to go. He began to sleep by the roadside, surviving on people's leftover food. That was when Josephine, a hairdresser who ran a small salon nearby, found him. She took pity on the young boy, offering him food and shelter. In return, William worked at her salon, sweeping, running errands, and eventually doing what he loved the most, makeup. But every night in Josephine's house, William noticed that Lady Josephine would always go out late at night while he slept, and return the next day with a lot of money. He wondered where she always went. Soon, Lady Josephine began to stare at William, thinking to herself of how beautiful he looked, and how she could benefit from it. She decided to condition him to follow her to the brothel where she worked at night, so he could work for her there too. She would collect money from the big gay Mr. Tony and his friends and offer William to them, telling him to do well before she locked him in with the men. These men would abuse William all over and over, devouring him from behind, while Lady Josephine took all the money, only paying William back with food. Soon, it became overbearing for William. He felt used. He felt trapped. He had no good clothes to wear or anything. Knowing he was being used, he summoned the courage to begin taking money directly from the men, and this threw Josephine into a state of anger. She cried out, lamenting over William's betrayal, after all she claimed to have done for him. And so she threw him out of her house, in the hope of cutting him off from the men she linked him up with. With nowhere to go, William ended up in a brothel home. He begged the women there to let him stay with them, and they agreed, so long as he would be bringing in money into the brothel for them. And so this marked the beginning of William's new life as a prostitute. In the brothel, being surrounded by people who had also known suffering, Williams found some semblance of peace. He dreamed of saving enough money to open his own makeup store one day, a place where he could be himself without fear. He clung to that dream with all the hope left in his young heart, believing that someday he would leave the shadows of his past behind and step into a future where his talent, not his pain, defined him. Years passed, and William began to wear his identity open for all to see. He grew up in the brothel and was fully identified as a woman. He would go with the girls and stand on the roadside where drunk men would stop at night to patronize the girls. Because he was so beautiful, these drunk and intoxicated men would pick him up, thinking he was a woman. When they get to the hotel room, William would give the men a condition that they should go straight to the point and enter him from behind. He would not allow them touch him or do any form of foreplay with him. in order to prevent them from finding out he was not truly a woman. And if anyone refused, he would walk out on them and return their money. Because these men were drunk, they won't notice that they were being cheated and that they were not actually with a woman, but a man. And so they would always do his bidding. One day, while William was walking with his mates on the street, they came across a poor old woman begging by the roadside. While the others paid her no attention, William felt a pang of pity for the woman. He returned later that day to give her some money, and this became a regular habit. As time went by, they became friends. William took the helpless old grandma to a building still under construction, where she could find shelter. He would bring her food and feed her, day after day. The old woman was so grateful. She felt like she had found a son in William. People would laugh at William whenever he walked by because of his appearance. But to the old woman, he was a savior. Though most people thought the worst of him and assumed he was useless, William had a pure heart despite his suffering. Whenever he visited, the grandma would sit him down and read the Bible to him, preaching about God and the importance of constant fellowship with him, no matter how difficult life became. Her words touched William deeply, breaking him down, for he had never been taught about God or experienced the love of God in his life. All William had known was rejection. He struggled between the thought of giving his life to God and letting go of his only source of income. Soon it was time for the grandma to leave and return to her village, where she planned to wait for death. She had suffered all her life and was now ready to go to God. She hugged William tightly, begging him to do her just one favor, to give his life to God, no matter what. William cried uncontrollably, knowing his only true friend was leaving for good. He made her a promise as he watched her leave, never to return to the brothel again. Before she left, she placed a Bible on the floor for William, challenging him to pick it up the day he decided to give his life to God. She told him the Bible would be waiting for him and that she would die a happy woman if he did. With teary eyes, William stared at the Bible on the floor. He found himself at crossroads, faced with a decision to discover God or continue with his old ways. That day, as he returned home, William could not stop thinking. All night, his mind was restless. Finally, he decided he would go back, pick up the Bible, and turn a new leaf. But just before he could act on this decision, he received a call from one of his brothel sisters, who later came home to tell him about a mega-millionaire client she had met. She explained that she had told the client she was coming with him, and they were to be his clients that night. William told her he was done with that life and planned to leave the next day. However, she cajoled him into joining her for the night, promising him a huge payout and assuring him that he would never have to return to that life again. Reluctantly, William agreed to go with her to meet the client, for what he hoped would be the last time. As the girls rendered their services to the wealthy client, he was very pleased that night. When morning came, William returned home with a large sum of money he had been paid, but his friend did not come back with him. Unknown to William, she had stolen from the client and fled with his millions. When the client discovered the theft, he was furious. He decided to set a trap, calling for both the girl and William to meet him by the roadside the next day at night. William tried reaching out to his friend, whose number was no longer reachable, as the client had complained. Left with no choice, William innocently decided to meet up with the client that night. But instead of the client, 4 hefty men approached him with forceful strides. Their leader immediately began accusing William of stealing from their boss. William tried to explain that he had no knowledge of any theft, but the leader ordered his men to beat him up. As they assaulted him, William's secret was revealed. The men discovered he was wearing a fake foam bra and realized he was actually a man. The leader's anger intensified. Being gay was something despised and met with hostility in their society. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the dusty streets where William lay. His body, beaten and broken, was sprawled lifeless on the ground. His once beautiful face now bruised and battered beyond recognition. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the earth, a stark contrast to the colorful makeup he once loved to wear. His eyes, now closed forever, held the faintest hint of tears, as if in his final moments he had glimpsed the promise he would never get to fulfill. The day before, William had been filled with hope. For the first time, he had considered the possibility of a different path, a life where he could finally be free of the chains that had bound him for so long. He had stared at the Bible the old woman had left behind, its cover worn and pages yellowed, yet it seemed to glow with a promise of something new. He was torn between the allure of quick money from his dangerous life and the peace he felt in the presence of the grandmother who had become like family to him, the only one who had ever truly seen him for who he was. But William's heart had been heavy. As he tossed and turned on the ground, he thought of the grandmother's words, "Give your life to God no matter what." Her voice echoed in his mind, soft yet firm, a plea wrapped in love. She had hugged him so tightly before leaving, her frail arms conveying a strength that he had never felt from anyone else. He had promised her he would try, and he intended to keep that promise. He had resolved to pick up that Bible and start anew, to choose a different life. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. His brothel sister's unexpected visit had been a test of his will. She had lured him back into his old ways, just for one last night. He needed the money, she had insisted, to finally escape the life that had trapped him for so long. William had hesitated, torn between the promise he made and the desperate pull of what felt like his only option. Just one last time, he had told himself, then I'll be free. But on the night of his last escapade, everything went wrong. He was met not with mercy, but with brutality. The men had descended upon him, fists raining down like thunder, their words like knives. They discovered his secret, and their anger turned into a blinding rage. To them, he was not just a thief, but a disgrace, an abomination. In their eyes, his very existence was an affront to their beliefs and values. Their fury was fueled by ignorance and hatred, and they beat him without restraint, without mercy. William had cried out, trying to explain, trying to plead for his life. But his voice was lost in the blows that kept coming, in the darkness that swallowed him whole. He had planned to pick up the Bible that day. He had planned to start a new life. But life had not given him the chance. William lay there, his body cold, under the dim glow of the streetlights. The world around him continued on, unaware that it had lost a boy with a pure heart. A boy who had been dealt the cruelest of hands yet still found the strength to care for others, even when no one cared for him. His dreams, his hopes, his promise to the only friend he had ever known, all were silenced in that moment. At the hospital, William's father lay on his sickbed, his face a mask of regret. His health had been failing for months, his strength sapped by a mysterious illness that no doctor could cure. As he lay there, he thought of his son, the boy he had cast away in his pursuit of perfection. His heart ached with a longing he had never known, a desire to hold William, to tell him that he was sorry, that he wished he had been a better father. But now, it was too late. William's mother sat at the hospital, her hands trembling as she thought about her mistakes. Tears stood in her eyes as she whispered, "We will find him. He will come back to us." But in her heart, she felt a deep, unspeakable dread. She had been complicit in her silence, in her failure to protect her child from the man she loved. And now, she too would have to live with the knowledge that they had both failed the one person they were supposed to love unconditionally. They did not know that their son was gone, that he would never return to them, never step through their door again. The Bible the old woman had left lay in the construction site, untouched, waiting for a boy who would never come back. A gust of wind blew through, rustling its pages, as if it too mourned the loss of a soul that had never been given the chance to live. In the village, the old woman sat by her window, looking out at the horizon, waiting for news of William. She knew her time was short, but she clung to the hope that he would find his way to God. "God," she whispered, "take care of my boy." She did not know that he had already left this world, his life taken too soon, his dreams crushed under the weight of a world that had never understood him. There is an old saying, "A child is a seed. Nurture it with love, and it will bloom. Neglect it, and it will wither and die." William was that seed, a beautiful soul who had the potential to blossom, had to bring color to a world that so desperately needed it. But instead he was left to wither, his light snuffed out by those who should have protected and loved him. William's story is a cautionary tale for every parent, every guardian, every person who has the power to shape a young life. It is a reminder that love and understanding are more powerful than any amount of discipline or strictness. A reminder that children are not meant to be molded into our own image, but rather to be loved for who they are, to be given the freedom to discover their own path. William did not die because he was weak or because he was lost. He died because the world failed him, because the people who should have loved him most, who should have nurtured his unique gifts, turned their backs when he needed them the most. May his story be a lesson, a call to action to every parent and guardian. For a child is like clay. It takes the shape of the hands that mold it. Let those hands be kind. Let them be gentle. Let them be filled with love. For in the end, it is not the child who fails. It is the world that fails the child. And so William's name fades into the quiet of the night. A name that should have been remembered for his gifts, his kindness, his beauty. Instead, it is remembered for a life cut short, a promise unfulfilled. The wind carries his story, hoping it reaches the ears of those who still have a chance to make a difference, to save another William from the same fate. The Bible, left in the dirt, waits for another hand to pick it up. A hand that might find in its pages the peace that William never could. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to this channel if you have not done so.